You ever get a letter that makes you question reality? I did. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, while sipping my coffee and trying to get through another day at work, I opened my mailbox and found it. A crisp, official-looking envelope from my HOA. You know, that all-powerful neighborhood council that has somehow decided it's the ultimate authority on everyone's life, down to how loudly you can hum in your own kitchen. The letter was from Karen, or as I would come to call her in my mind, HOA Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of our suburban paradise. The envelope had that ominous, too formal look, the kind that says, "This is serious, you're in trouble." I tore it open, already feeling the chill that something ridiculous was about to unfold. And unfold it did. The letter claimed, and I quote, that I had been generating excessive noise late at night, specifically on the night of last Thursday. Apparently my music, or perhaps my ghostly phantom stereo, was keeping the entire neighborhood awake. It concluded with a demand: pay a fine or face escalating consequences. There was only one problem. I had been at work that night. Not just out of the house, I had been at the office, stuck in meetings, answering emails, and sipping cold coffee at my desk like a law-abiding adult. My house had been empty, alone, silent. I read the letter twice, then 3 times. Maybe there was a hidden clause I missed. Maybe HOA Karen had installed some sort of psychic music detector that works across town lines. Nope. Just her name, her signature, and that smug, self-satisfied tone that made you feel like she'd already imagined me groveling before her in shame. At first I laughed. I mean, who would? The thought that someone actually believed I had supernatural powers to blast music while simultaneously being elsewhere was absurd. But then slowly that laughter turned into a mix of confusion, irritation, and a little bit of dread. This wasn't just a joke, she was serious. Karen was serious, and serious people with zero sense of reality are dangerous. I sat down, coffee cooling in my hand, and stared at the paper. My mind started racing. How do you respond to something like this? You can't just write back, "Sorry, Karen, I'm not a wizard." No, apparently you need evidence, proof, documentation, something that actually shows you weren't breaking imaginary laws. And that's when I realized this was going to be a journey, a battle of wits with a woman who clearly considered herself omniscient. I had 2 options: ignore it and risk escalation, or prepare my defense meticulously. I opted for the latter. Before I could do anything, I had to understand Karen. And by understand, I mean figure out the exact way she thought, which honestly isn't easy. She's the kind of person who believes the mailman is conspiring against her, the wind whispers secrets, and dogs are clearly agents of chaos sent to test her patience. Dealing with her logic is like trying to teach calculus to a goldfish. It doesn't work, and it might bite you. Still, I had a plan forming. Step 1, confirm my own alibi. Check work schedules, security cameras, anything that proves that not only was I not home, but there was absolutely no noise coming from my house. Step 2, figure out how to present this to her without getting trapped in some HOA ritual where rules bend around whatever she wants to believe. And step 3, well, that step was simple. Make sure Karen can't double down on her fantasy. Because trust me, women like Karen never admit when they're wrong, they escalate. They dig their heels in deeper than the Hoover Dam, and they expect you to respect it. I could already see it in my head. The confrontation, the smug smile, the tapping foot like she was some kind of judge in a courtroom drama. I wasn't ready for her theatrics yet, but I was ready to fight, armed with evidence, patience, and a little bit of well-timed sarcasm. So I sat there staring at the letter and thought, all right, Karen, you think you know everything. Let's see how this goes when the truth shows up at your perfectly manicured doorstep. And that's how it started. A simple letter from HOA Karen claiming that I disturbed the peace while I wasn't even home. A letter that promised chaos, confrontation, and a lesson in humility for her. I just didn't know it yet. Little did I know, this was only the beginnings. After staring at that ridiculous letter from HOA Karen for the 3rd time, I realized one thing: this wasn't going to be solved with logic alone. Karen wasn't interested in facts or reality. She was invested in her own version of the story, and she was ready to punish me for it. So if I wanted to survive this suburban nightmare, I had to play by one rule: evidence. Real, undeniable, can't argue with this evidence. The first step was simple in theory: prove where I actually was on that infamous night. I pulled up my work schedule, my emails, and even text messages to my coworkers. Every timestamp was a nail in the coffin of her fantasy. I wasn't blasting music at midnight. I was sitting in a cubicle struggling not to fall asleep during a Zoom meeting. Not glamorous, not exciting, but legally, undeniably boring. Next, I turned to technology. My phone's location history is like a diary you didn't ask for, except this time it was my savior. I could show exactly where I was every hour of that night. Each ping, each GPS point, each little digital breadcrumb was proof that my house was as quiet as a library. Then came the cameras. I have a couple of security cameras around my property, mostly to keep an eye on the dog and my overenthusiastic neighbor's cat, but now they served a higher purpose. I downloaded the footage from the night in question, watching my empty living room, the blinds swaying gently, and my cat, Mr. Whiskers, sleeping like a tiny, judgmental angel. Not a sound, not a party, not a single trace of the disturbing noise Karen claimed to have heard. As I assembled this evidence, I couldn't help but imagine Karen sitting in her perfectly manicured yard, ears straining like a paranormal investigator, convinced she was right. It was almost laughable if it weren't terrifyingly obsessive. She wasn't just an HOA president, she was a one-woman noise tribunal. I had to respect the absurdity of her commitment. Almost. By the time I had everything organized, work logs, GPS screenshots, camera footage, I had a plan. I would walk into that HOA office armed with proof so solid, so undeniable that even Karen couldn't twist it into some kind of conspiracy. My only worry? Karen doesn't operate in normal human logic. She's a force of nature, and nature doesn't always follow rules. I thought about calling the police, but I held off for now. I wanted the initial confrontation to be just me versus Karen. Let her see the strength of reality first without outside interference. This was personal. This was a test of patience and wit, and frankly, I was curious to see how far she would go before the first cracks appeared. While gathering all this evidence, I couldn't help but chuckle at some of the things I found. My phone history showed me ordering a pizza at 10:15 p.m., hours before the noise complaint. I imagined Karen packing her lawn in horror, thinking some spectral force had taken over my apartment and hosted a rave while I was at work. I laughed out loud. Loud enough that Mr. Whiskers gave me a look that clearly said, "You're ridiculous, human." But underneath the humor, there was tension. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She's the type who believes rules are tools for other people, and she has a knack for escalating situations. Every ounce of me was preparing for that moment, the confrontation where she would argue, deny, manipulate, and try to make me feel guilty for exposing her mistake. And yet I felt a small thrill. There's something oddly satisfying about preparing for a battle you know is righteous, about standing up to someone who thinks their self-righteousness is law. I wasn't just gathering evidence, I was building armor. By the end of the night, I had everything ready, a neatly organized folder, screenshots, timestamps, and video footage. It was all lined up, ready for the showdown. I sat back, sipping my third coffee, staring at the stack of proof, and realized this was going to be one of the most entertaining confrontations I had ever been part of. The anticipation was delicious. I could practically see Karen's smug face when I walked in, and then the look that would follow when reality hit her squarely in the chest. Little did I know, even with all my preparation, Karen had tricks of her own. Tricks that would test my patience, my sense of humor, and my ability to stay calm in the most absurd situation imaginable. And so, armed with proof, patience, and a smirk that wouldn't fade, I waited for the right moment. The moment when HOA Karen would realize she had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. The morning of the confrontation, I could feel my heart racing. I wasn't nervous about being wrong, I was confident. No, my anxiety came from the fact that I was about to stand face-to-face with HOA Karen, a woman who seemed to exist solely to make other people's lives miserable. I grabbed my folder of evidence, took a deep breath, and stepped into her lair, also known as the HOA office. The moment I walked through the door, I saw her. She was sitting behind her desk, upright, arms crossed, a posture that screamed, "I am the law here and don't you forget it." She looked up at me with that smug, self-satisfied expression that could curdle milk. I swear she had a clipboard in one hand and an invisible gavel in the other. "Ah, so you received my letter," she said, her voice sharp like she was slicing the air with each word. "I trust you understand the severity of the situation." I forced a calm smile, setting my folder down in front of her. "Actually, Karen, I'd like to clarify a few things about that noise complaint." Her eyebrows shot up. "Clarify?" she said. "I assure you my reports are precise. Your neighbors have confirmed." "Neighbors?" I interrupted gently. "Funny, I spoke to a few of them yesterday. They said they didn't hear anything at all, not a thing." I opened my folder and began laying out my evidence. Timestamps from my work schedule, screenshots of GPS tracking, even video footage from my home security cameras. For a moment, I thought she might pause and look at the evidence. She didn't. She leaned back, tapping her pen against her lips like a cat toying with a mouse. "Well," she said, "technology isn't always reliable. Perhaps your devices are malfunctioning, or, maybe there's another explanation." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Another explanation, like ghosts or some kind of noise-detecting psychic? "Karen, I was not home that night," I said firmly. "I have timestamp proof showing exactly where I was for every minute of the evening. I can show it to you again." She frowned, the first real crack in her facade, but then she leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes narrowing. I have my own sources, she said conspiratorially. People hear things and my ears do not lie. I had to fight to keep my laughter in check. Her sources, like a neighborhood watch that doubled as a gossip network. Karen, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, I respect your dedication, I really do. But the law, evidence, and reality don't agree with you on this one. You can't fine me for something that didn't happen. That's illegal. Her face twisted, a mixture of indignation and frustration. She opened her mouth, probably to say something about neighborhood peace or moral responsibility, but I held up a hand. I've documented everything. GPS, work logs, security footage. If you want to dispute it, we can involve the proper authorities. Otherwise, this conversation is over. The suspense was palpable. You could feel it in the air. I could see her mind spinning, trying to reconcile the reality in front of her with the fantasy she had built for weeks. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes darted around like she was looking for an escape hatch. Finally, she leaned back and let out a dramatic sigh. I suppose we can look into this further, she muttered, clearly buying time while she plotted her next move. I couldn't tell if she was relieved, embarrassed, or just furious, probably all three. I stood up, gathering my folder. Great, I said, smiling politely. I'll be happy to provide all this to the authorities if needed, but for now, let's consider this resolved. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, burning with the fire of someone who refuses to admit defeat. The tension didn't disappear, it just shifted. She wasn't going to give up that easily. This wasn't the end, it was just the opening act of a battle that was far from over. Walking out of that office, I felt a mix of triumph and anticipation. Triumph because I had faced her head-on and presented undeniable proof. Anticipation because I knew Karen was the type to escalate. This was a woman who believed she was always right, a woman who could turn a molehill into a mountain overnight. And I had just given her the tools to build the biggest mountain of her life. But little did I know, the next move would require more than just proof and patience. It would require calling in backup, and the suspense of what that would unleash was only just beginning. After leaving the HOA office, I knew one thing for sure: Karen was not done. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, scheming, plotting, probably drafting imaginary fines for imaginary infractions. She was the type of person who doubles down when faced with evidence. I had presented proof, I had been calm, I had been polite, and she was furious. That meant only one thing: the next move had to be stronger. It was time to call in the real authority. I dialed the local police non-emergency line, trying to explain the situation without sounding completely insane. Yes, officer, I said, I need to document a false noise complaint filed by my HOA. I could practically hear them raising an eyebrow on the other end. But once I laid out the details, dates, times, and proof that I wasn't even home, they agreed to check the matter officially. The suspense began to build as I waited for the police to arrive at the HOA office. I could imagine Karen, probably packing, probably muttering under her breath about conspiracy theories, probably telling herself she'd finally teach me a lesson about neighborhood obedience. When the officers arrived, the tension in the office was immediate. Karen's smug confidence faltered for the first time, though she tried to mask it. Officers, she said, voice a bit too tight, I just want a report. I'm here to review the complaint, one of the officers interrupted politely, holding a clipboard. We have a report that the noise allegedly came from this address. Can you provide any evidence of your whereabouts? Karen froze for a split second, then launched into her story about late-night disturbances. I watched her closely, almost like I was observing a character in a drama unfold in real time. Her face was tight, her hands fluttering as she gestured, trying to sound convincing. But she didn't know what I had prepared. I handed the officer my folder. Here are timestamps, GPS locations, work schedules, and security camera footage showing I was not home at the time of the alleged noise. Everything is documented. The officer's eyes scanned the pages, then the video footage, then back to me. He nodded slowly. This is thorough, he said. We'll need to verify, but if this checks out, the complaint is unfounded. Karen's confident posture began to wobble. You could almost see the color drain from her face. She tried to interject, but her words stumbled over themselves. Well, technology isn't always accurate. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, this is precise, verifiable information. If you're disputing it, you'll need equally verifiable evidence. Silence filled the room. The tension was thick enough you could cut it with a knife. Karen's usual bravado, her aura of self-righteous authority, was slipping, exposing the panic she had been hiding beneath the surface. Every second she stayed quiet, her credibility diminished further. The neighbors in the office, who had been silently watching, shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the shift in power. Karen's ego was crumbling and there was nothing she could do about it. It was like watching a soap opera, only real and infinitely more satisfying. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was quietly thrilled. Finally, someone official was seeing through the smoke and mirrors. Finally, evidence mattered more than imagination. The suspense was delicious. The moment when authority and truth collide with delusion is always a little thrilling. Karen tried one last maneuver. I don't know how this could be, maybe the sound traveled. The officer's expression was unwavering. Ma'am, if the noise did occur, it would need to originate from the address in question. These records show that the resident was not there, that's all we can conclude. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like she had been caught mid-act in a heist she had only imagined. It was surreal, and somehow beautiful. As the officers began taking official notes and filing their report, I realized something important. The tide had turned. Karen's fantasy was colliding with reality, and reality was winning. The suspense of the confrontation hadn't ended, it was evolving. I had set the stage, but the final act, where Karen's panic would be fully exposed, was still ahead. And just like that, I walked out of the HOA office with a sense of calm satisfaction. I had prepared, I had acted, and I had invoked authority in a way that Karen couldn't twist or spin. The next moves would be crucial. Karen wasn't the type to quietly accept defeat, but one thing was certain: her face had turned pale, and for the first time she realized that she might have gone too far. And trust me, when HOA Karen starts panicking, it's the beginning of a performance that's both dramatic and unintentionally hilarious. After the police had reviewed the evidence and quietly taken notes, I could feel the room shifting. Karen's confident, towering presence, the one that had dominated the HOA office for years, was beginning to wobble. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding in her head, desperately trying to find a loophole, an excuse, or a magical explanation for why I wasn't blasting music at midnight. She leaned back in her chair, hands fidgeting with pens, tapping her fingers nervously. "Well, technology can be wrong," she muttered, her voice cracking slightly. "Sometimes cameras fail, phones malfunction, GPS is unreliable." I stared at her, keeping my voice calm, but letting just a hint of dry humor slip in. "Karen, I triple-checked everything. The timestamps match my work schedule, the GPS data confirms I was at my office, and the security footage shows my house empty. I'd like to see your evidence that proves otherwise." Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for a secret ally in the corner. She was grasping for a narrative that would allow her to save face. The neighbors who had gathered for the meeting, or maybe just happened to be walking past, were whispering, trying not to laugh. I could practically hear their thoughts. "Oh wow, she's losing it." Karen's usual flair for drama became more pronounced. She began packing, speaking in fragmented sentences. I just know my ears, my senses, it was you. It was a surreal performance. I had read about people cracking under pressure in movies, but this was art in the form of suburban obsession. I decided to push a little further. "Karen, if you have actual proof, I'm happy to review it, but unless it's documented, time-stamped, verifiable, it doesn't hold up. And right now, all we have is your word against reality." Her frown deepened. For a moment, she looked like she might explode, but then she swallowed hard and muttered something about supernatural noise traveling through the air and disturbances from the cosmos. I had to suppress a laugh. The officer in the room didn't even flinch. He was clearly used to hearing some version of HOA Karen's delusions. The suspense in the room was palpable. Every word, every gesture, every tiny wobble in her voice made it clear she was on the edge. She wasn't used to being challenged, much less proven wrong with hard evidence. I could almost taste her frustration, thick and tangible in the air, like the calm before a storm. I stayed calm, taking a moment to glance at the folder on the table, my shield, my sword, my silent evidence of truth. Every timestamp, every security clip, every GPS point was a nail in the coffin of Karen's fantasy. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to argue. I just needed to let reality do its work. Karen's hands started trembling slightly as she reached for her chair. I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her face, usually flushed with smug authority, was now pale, almost ghostly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find the words that would save her dignity. The tension in the room was electric. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about watching someone unravel, and I have to admit it was fascinating. The officers were patient, neighbors were whispering, and Karen, well, she was teetering on the edge of total meltdown. Then she did something truly remarkable. She tried to appeal to emotion, to morality, to the universe itself. Even if you weren't home, the noise, it must have come from you. I leaned forward slightly, smiling politely, letting my calm confidence do its work. Karen, the universe isn't accusing me. The police, the evidence, the facts, they all point to the same conclusion. There was no noise, you were mistaken, and that's okay, it happens. But we need to base our actions on truth, not assumption. Her shoulders slumped, a subtle, almost imperceptible defeat creeping into her posture. The suspense was still there, but now it had shifted. It wasn't if she would break, it was how badly. By the time I left that office, Karen had retreated to her desk, muttering under her breath, flipping through papers like a desperate detective trying to rewrite reality. And I walked out, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of seeing truth collide with delusion. I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. Karen doesn't give up that easily, she would escalate. She would invent new complaints, new fines, maybe even a neighborhood tribunal of imaginary witnesses. But for now, I had survived the first real crack in her armor. And trust me, the next move, the moment the police officially confirmed my innocence, would push her into territory even she couldn't imagine. The moment had finally arrived. I had gathered my evidence, confronted Karen, and watched her start to crack under the weight of reality. But now it was time for the ultimate validation, the one thing that no amount of stubbornness could challenge: the police. I returned to the HOA office with a mix of anticipation and amusement, folder in hand. The officers were already there, reviewing my submitted evidence, clipboard balanced carefully, expressions calm but serious. Karen was waiting, of course, perched behind her desk like a queen on her crumbling throne. She shot me a look, a mix of defiance, panic, and disbelief that someone would dare bring in actual authorities. One officer turned to me first, nodding. "We've verified the timestamps, the GPS logs, and the security camera footage. Everything checks out. You were not at home during the reported noise incident." Karen froze mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide, her face slowly draining of color, shifting from the faint blush of indignation to something approaching ghostly pale. You could see the panic flicker across her expression like a light bulb struggling to stay lit in a storm. I had to suppress a grin. Watching someone who thought they were untouchable suddenly realize they were wrong, it's a rare kind of satisfaction. What do you mean verified?" she stammered, trying to recover. I heard it myself, my neighbors, they heard it." The officer held up a hand, cutting through her protest. "Ma'am, we conducted interviews, checked records, and cross-referenced everything with the timestamps and video evidence. There is no corroboration for the alleged noise. Legally, the complaint cannot stand." Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. The letters of "I was right" seemed to evaporate from her mind. The smugness, the confidence, the illusion of authority, all of it collapsing under the weight of facts. The suspense in the room was almost tangible. The neighbors who had been quietly observing now leaned forward, whispering excitedly. I could practically hear the collective aha echoing in my head. Karen, who had built her entire identity around being the all-seeing, all-knowing enforcer of suburban law, had no defense. None. She tried one last desperate tactic, her voice rising in frustration. But maybe the noise traveled, the vibrations, sound waves, it could have bounced. The officer blinked, unimpressed. "Ma'am, there is no evidence for that. You can't base fines on assumptions or speculation. The resident has been proven not to be at the location at the time of the complaint. Case closed." And that's when it happened. The moment every neighborhood drama reaches its cinematic climax, Karen's face completely turned pale, her jaw slackened, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The room held its breath. The neighbors watched, trying to stifle laughter. Even the officers exchanged a glance that seemed to say, "This is going to be entertaining for the HOA records." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was riding a wave of vindication. Years of subtle HOA intimidation, of phantom fines and imagined disturbances had led to this moment, and now reality was finally catching up to her. Karen opened her mouth, maybe to deny it one last time, maybe to blame the wind or the cat, but no words came. She was frozen, caught in the undeniable truth. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding, futilely trying to reconcile what she believed with the evidence before her eyes. The officer made a few more notes, finalizing the official record. "The complaint is dismissed," he said simply. "No fines, no action, and the record will reflect that the resident was not at home at the time in question." Her shoulders slumped, her aura of authority evaporating like mist. I didn't gloat, not openly, I simply smiled politely and nodded. The suspension, the drama, the long wait for justice, it had all been worth it. The suspense had reached its peak, and now the resolution was official. Karen slowly sank back into her chair, pale and defeated, muttering something about mistakes and misunderstanding. The tension in the room shifted from suspense to something almost comical, watching someone so certain of their own infallibility confront undeniable truth. As I left the office, I felt a strange mix of relief and triumph. The evidence had spoken, the law had spoken, reality had spoken. Karen had nothing left but her ego, now crumbling under the weight of truth. But deep down, I knew this wasn't quite over. People like Karen don't disappear quietly, they escalate, they invent, they search for new ways to assert control. And while I had won this round, the anticipation of what she might try next added a new layer of suspense. For now, though, I had my victory, and the sight of HOA Karen, pale and speechless, is something I'll never forget. After the police had officially confirmed my innocence, I thought maybe, just maybe, HOA Karen would slink away quietly, defeated but harmless. I was wrong, so very, very wrong. Some people, it turns out, don't accept defeat. They escalate, they invent new rules, they dig in their heels and try to rewrite reality to suit their ego. Karen was one of those people. It started subtly at first. A new notice appeared on my door, stamped in that annoyingly authoritative font she loved, titled New HOA Noise and Conduct Guidelines. I opened it cautiously, half expecting to see some reasonable clarification. Nope. The notice was pure fiction. She had added clauses about psychic disturbances, vibrational interference, and neighborhood harmony violations, all apparently targeting me. I laughed out loud. Mr. Whiskers gave me a judging look, as if to say, "You brought this on yourself." But even as I chuckled, the tension in the air reminded me, this was Karen, and she was not playing by the rules of normal human logic. She was about to launch her final assault. The next morning, she called a special HOA meeting. The room was full of neighbors, some curious, some skeptical, all waiting for the inevitable spectacle. Karen, as expected, took the stage like a general preparing to declare war. Her face was still pale from the police confrontation, but her determination had morphed into something almost feral. Today, she began, voice trembling slightly but with forced authority, we discuss ongoing noise disturbances. Even though some people refuse to acknowledge their wrongdoing, she glanced pointedly at me, the HOA has a responsibility to maintain order and peace. I could feel the suspense building in the room. Neighbors leaned forward, whispers spreading. Everyone knew this was going to be ridiculous, and everyone wanted to see how far she would go. Karen's strategy was simple, create so many new rules and complaints that she could trap me in an endless web of imaginary violations. There will be fines for unauthorized use of sound, vibrations above acceptable levels, and any activity deemed disturbing, even if indirect or unintentional, she announced, as though that made perfect sense. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice calm but firm. Karen, the police have already confirmed that I was not at home during the alleged noise incident. Any fines based on speculation or imagination are unenforceable. The HOA cannot act outside the law. Her face flushed red and she stammered, trying to recover, but the neighborhood you. I interrupted gently, letting the calm tension build. Karen, I respect your dedication to the HOA, but the facts are on record. Evidence matters, reality matters, and at this point you're simply inventing complaints. Let's stick to what can be proven. Her hands trembled as she tried to regain control, flipping through papers, muttering about vibrations, wind patterns, and the occasional ghostly noise. The neighbors were barely containing their amusement, some were outright smirking. She had lost the room. The suspense wasn't about whether she would admit defeat, it was about what kind of absurdity she would unleash before realizing she couldn't win. Karen's final maneuver was desperate and spectacular. She tried to accuse me of provoking neighborhood discord and emotional distress to residents based entirely on her own imagination. I stared at her, fighting to keep a straight face. This was the moment where her obsession collided fully with reality, and reality was about to win. I calmly referenced the police report, the evidence, and the official dismissal of the original complaint. Karen, you can't create violations out of thin air. The law, the police, and the documented facts are clear. Your attempts to find me further are null and void. For a moment, it seemed like the room itself held its breath. Karen's face turned an even paler shade of white, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. She realized, finally, fully, that her power had crumbled. She slumped in her chair, defeated, exhausted, and utterly humiliated. The neighbors whispered, some openly laughing now. The tension shifted from suspense to relief, tinged with humor. Karen had reached the limit of her authority, and there was no more battlefield to fight on. I smiled politely, gathering my evidence one last time. The suspense had built to a climax, and now it resolved. Karen's reign of imaginary fines and delusions had ended. For the moment at least, peace returned to the neighborhood. As I walked out of that meeting, a strange mixture of triumph and amusement washed over me. Karen's last desperate attempt at control had failed spectacularly. She was pale, flustered, and defeated, but I knew something deep down she might come up with another imaginary battle soon, and when that day came, I would be ready. For now, though, the neighborhood was calm. I had survived Karen's wrath, navigated her delusions, and emerged victorious. The suspense, the drama, the humor, all of it had led to this satisfying moment of resolution. After Karen's last desperate attempt at control, I finally felt something I hadn't in weeks: relief. Walking out of that HOA meeting, evidence in hand and police validation on my side, I realized I had survived the full force of HOA Karen at her most delusional. And not just survived, I had won. The neighborhood felt different that day. There was a quiet, almost celebratory energy in the air. Neighbors who had been cautiously observing Karen's antics now approached me with congratulatory nods, smiles, and whispers of approval. Some even admitted they had secretly been rooting for me, quietly documenting the absurdity from their own porches. I couldn't blame them. After all, Karen's obsession with imagined disturbances was exhausting to watch. Back at home, I unpacked my folder, carefully storing all the evidence, timestamps, and police reports. It felt strange to have tangible proof of such a surreal battle. Who knew that a simple HOA noise complaint could escalate into this level of drama, humor, and suspense? Mr. Whiskers curled up on my lap, clearly judging me for laughing at the absurdity of it all. I petted him, thinking about the weeks of tension that had finally evaporated. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated to her office, or perhaps her home, plotting imaginary revenge. I didn't see her for a while. Rumor had it she spent hours rewriting HOA rules that targeted ghosts, wind, and vibrations from outer space. Her face was still pale, and the neighbors joked that she looked like she had been personally haunted by the law itself. I couldn't help but chuckle. After weeks of anxiety, confrontation, and police involvement, the sheer absurdity of Karen's delusions had reached a peak, and I had survived. More importantly, I had done it with patience, calm, and undeniable proof. The real victory, though, wasn't just that Karen had been humiliated, it was that peace had returned to my home. No more imaginary fines, no more baseless complaints, no more afternoons spent wondering if Karen had invented a new rule about humming in the kitchen. I could finally relax, enjoy quiet evenings, and yes, play music if I wanted to, without fear of another absurd noise accusation. But there was a deeper lesson hidden beneath the humor and drama. HOA Karen had taught me something valuable. Some battles are won not with anger or confrontation, but with preparation, patience, and evidence. Facing someone who refuses to accept reality requires strategy, calm, and a little bit of humor to survive the absurdity. And when that's combined with law and authority on your side, victory is almost inevitable. Weeks later, life returned to its normal rhythm. The neighborhood was quieter, more peaceful. Karen occasionally appeared, clipboard in hand, but there was a noticeable restraint in her demeanor. She no longer attempted to find me, no longer launched imaginary investigations, and I suspect no longer believed she could enforce cosmic noise regulations. For the first time, her aura of omnipotence had been stripped away, and the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. I reflected on the entire experience, how a simple noise complaint had spiraled into weeks of tension, humor, and suspense. The confrontation, the police involvement, and Karen's final meltdown had all been surreal yet instructive. It reminded me that standing up for yourself, even in the face of absurd authority, is worth the effort. Evidence, patience, and a calm demeanor are weapons far stronger than hysteria or bravado. And of course, there's the humor. Watching Karen, so certain of her power, unravel in real time was a lesson in humility for her and for anyone who had doubted the power of logic over imagination. I often tell the story to neighbors now, careful to exaggerate just enough for comedic effect, watching as they laugh and shake their heads in disbelief. Some even ask for updates, eager for news of any new battles that Karen might invent. In the end, I had my quiet life back, and the neighborhood had its peace restored. Karen had her lessons in humility, reality had prevailed, and I had survived one of the most absurdly dramatic encounters of suburban life. And so, life moved forward. Music played, doors closed, windows swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the echoes of HOA Karen's delusions slowly faded into memory. For now, at least, the neighborhood was calm, the air was light, and I could finally enjoy my home without worrying about the next imaginary noise violation. Victory, it turns out, is not just about being right. It's about surviving the absurdity, keeping your calm, and letting reality quietly, inevitably do its work. And in this case, reality had won spectacularly. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.